International relations are like other relations. Success depends on understanding who you are, understanding who you're dealing with, and understanding what it is you want from your relationships. Some nations struggle with understanding who they are. Russia is a good example of this. Some nations struggle with understanding whom they're dealing with. European nations are a good example of that. And some nations struggle to understand what it is that they want from others. When it comes to this type of confusion, there is nobody like an American politician. But you will not be so confused because you've come to take the gold pill. The two major parties in the media can no longer be expected to represent our interests. They control the information we receive in order to keep us comfortable with their profits and with their power. Comfort is not what I offer, only the truth, nothing more. What is the United States? What makes us unique? What is our brand, and what should it be to the rest of the world? The world sees America as the land of opportunity. Opportunity that is defined by a combination of a welcoming immigration policy and a relatively strong protection of individual freedom, imperfect as that may be. We've developed a culture of tolerance, multiculturalism, which is from time to time denied by various people inside the United States, primarily Marxists, and those who have never ventured outside of the United States to see what real intolerance looks like. We've developed a culture of democratic institutions, capitalistic entrepreneurialism, a sense of adventures that would be virtually impossible anywhere else in the world. When America stands up for human rights, for women's rights, for the rights of racial minorities, for LGBTQ rights, the world recognizes our leadership, our moral authority to lead, as credible. It is who we are, at least when we're at our best. When America stands up for freedom, for democratic self-determination, for the economic self-determination that has become known as capitalism, the world recognizes our leadership and our moral authority to lead as credible. Again, it is who we are, again, at least when we're at our best. It is in our interest, and frankly, in the interest of the rest of the world, for the U.S. to be who we are, at least when we're at our best, and to be so loudly. To the extent to which we can spread these values, the world can become, if only slowly and incrementally over a long period of time, a place more conducive to human development, to economic development. Freedom inside of other countries acts as a bulwark against the rise of governments that would take up arms and create international aggression. Freedom fosters economic growth, which expands international trade opportunities, which in turn further enhances both peace and prosperity. This is in the long-term interest to peace and therefore to the United States, because we, like every other nation, depend on peace and stability to thrive both in terms of economics and in terms of human development. But with the turn of the 20th century, some politicians in the United States became confused. They started confusing the adventure that is inherent in freedom and economic opportunity with adventurism through international conflict and, in some cases, imperialistic control of others. They started confusing our interest in spreading our values with a willingness to spread our form of government, and oftentimes through force. They confused the possibility of winning wars with the possibility of earning respect. As we now know, if only by looking back over the past 100 years, armed conflict cannot spread values. Destroying government institutions does not automatically give rise to new ones, and imposing our will does not build productive relationships. We must be clear-eyed about what our goal should be: the spread of our values, not the spread of our government, not even the spread of our control. Our goal must be, as it must be with domestic policy, to foster an environment conducive to the cultural and economic development of our people. It is clearly in our interest to spread those values that foster the right conditions, just as it is clearly counter to our interests to spread our control by force. If our goal is, as I believe that it must be, to expand freedom, the real question is how. How do we develop the influence of soft power to help advance the necessary conditions around the world for freedom to take hold? All of our policies should support this one single unifying objective. All of our immigration policies should support this objective. All of our military policies should support this one objective, and all of our trade policies should as well support this one objective. A more welcoming immigration policy would support this objective of the United States, recognizing that many people have security concerns regarding immigration and there is a need for processes that allow for proper vetting. We should be dedicating the resources necessary for such vetting and the resources necessary for admitting legal immigrants as rapidly as possible. Our current population of perhaps 350 million people is not some magic number. There's no analytic reason to believe that we would not be better off with a population of 400 million or 500 million or some other number. A greater population indeed would allow for greater soft power and hopefully greater effectiveness in moving the world toward peace and prosperity. Our military policy should also align behind this one unifying objective. It has long been policy of the United States that we should have a military capability sufficient to wage and win a war on two fronts. Even if we accept this policy, and if we accept the notion that we might have to win such a war against an adversary comprised of all of our international adversaries simultaneously, we do have this capability. It would logically follow that it would be reasonable for us to expect that our allies, those on whom we can count in a pinch, should have collectively a similar capability. And so together with our allies, the logic would follow that we would have twice as much force capability as necessary to fight a war against all of our international adversaries at the same time. Even if we were to accept this premise, and it's not obvious that we should, there are certain adjustments that should, and I would argue could, be made to our current military force without compromising our capabilities. Among the adjustments that we should be making to our military thinking, number one is a recognition that we already today have a force capability far in excess of what would be required to win such a colossal war. Indeed, this excess is expensive. There are savings to be had. Number two, our allies need to step up to the plate. Several nations have, but nobody spends anywhere near the proportion of their gross domestic product that the United States does, and this is a problem. Number three, the United States should be pivoting not just to the Pacific, as we have been the last few years, but to the future and to the private sector in terms of technologies. Our citizens face threats that do not always align with those at the forefront of our institutional military minds. Number four, Nation building doesn't work. We should have learned this a century ago. We should have learned this a half of a century ago. We should have learned this a quarter century ago. At least by now, this should be clear. And number 5, related to number 4, choosing sides in civil wars is not only an ethical problem, but we have a horrible track record of being able to pick winners, or in many cases, even affecting who is going to win and who is going to lose. Number 6, coalitions are in many cases an excellent way to leverage resources to maximize the effectiveness of our investments in international actions. But coalitions that take on a life of their own, with, for example, in some cases, independent governance structures, standing independent authorities, are doomed to fail to adhere to our required policies of accountability and transparency and limiting authority. The idea of trying to make our military institutions more accountable and more responsive to our true democratic interests are unlikely to be advanced by more government and more institutional interests. Trade policy must also fall in line with supporting our unifying international objectives. Not having free trade agreements in place with every nation on earth is a failure. It's a lost opportunity in every case. Building relationships with other nations is absolutely advanced by free trade relationships. It fosters peace and helps move other nations toward prosperity as well as peace, which advances our own prosperity. It advances international stability. Our government, on an ethical level, hardly has the right to restrict our own citizens' rights to trade. Trade itself is a driver of economic growth. It contributes to increasing wage rates in the United States. There can be disruptions. These disruptions are going to happen one way or another in the long run. So, we should be following a policy of non-intervention domestically as well as in our trade policies. Combined with economic growth, this attracts capital to the United States and in the long run increases our wage rates. Economic sanctions are a tactic used by governments to influence other governments, as though it were governments that actually matter. The truth is that when economic sanctions are imposed, it is our people, not our government, who bear the costs. These costs are borne by our people on our side of a trade war. And people, not governments, bear the cost on our adversaries' side of any trade war as well. Expecting our adversaries to be sensitive to the plight of their people is grossly naive, particularly given that those governments' insensitivity to the plight of their people is typically what led to us labeling them as adversaries in the first place. It's breathtakingly naive to see governments pretend that the Chinese government, for example, would react immediately to us imposing economic sanctions when the reason that we're imposing economic sanctions is because we believe that the Chinese government is insensitive to protecting people's property rights. Why would a government that fails to protect individuals' property rights be expected to react to bad things happening to its people in the first place? The mentality that our government needs to control people's decisions, whether those people are Americans or not, whether those people are in America or not, is counter to what we now know about the freedoms required to foster human and economic development both here and abroad. Politics has become a battle between, on one side, those politicians and pundits, jurists and journalists, regulators and revisionists, who have a faith in government to solve problems for people better than people can themselves. On our side of this battle are history, science, people like you, people like me, and common sense. Thanks for helping me make this sense a little bit more common, and thanks for coming to take the gold pill. Comfort is not what I offer, only the truth, nothing more.